So, let's begin with Indigenous. Obviously, here in Australia, we have had a great struggle with inheriting the past, the history of our relationship with our Indigenous people. And I think that should make us conscious of all Indigenous people, whether they're in Australia or other parts of the world. Musically, I've been one of those people who needs to have permission to use Indigenous music that's very personal to them. And only on very few occasions, even in places where I have studied, in Japan, because in a sense, like Indonesia, Japan is a very old, with many Indigenous going back thousands of years. I need permission to use their instruments or their music, but the aesthetic, I want to learn from the aesthetic. When it comes to world music, that's really the answer. In other words, without taking, but merely learning from and then making it personal, I've found it very interesting. So I've written a lot of music that's a reflection on my relationships with people, and often they're people from other cultures. And so for me, that's a kind of world music. I have only written for unusual instruments, non-Western instruments, quite infrequently. I've written for some Japanese instruments, but not many. I've written very occasionally for didgeridoo and clapping sticks, but more as a kind of permission to acknowledge we must learn from. So that, I think, so I, as a composer, I haven't used Indigenous music inside my music, and I haven't used world music literally in my music. But I'd like to think all music is world music, and we should, feel free to reflect on what others do and borrow the essence. So I think we learn from each other's music. I've been studying music from Southeast Asia and North Asia for a long time, and I respect the folk music and traditional musics. I like music. Obviously, everybody. I've never met someone who doesn't like gamelan, but also the other instruments of Indonesia. But also, I like one of my favorite instruments is the. In Japan, it's called the sho, and it's called kien in some countries, and through Cambodia and Thailand. I just think that's a very interesting instrument, and one that's, I'd like to know more of the music, and I think that's my attitude to both Indigenous music and world music. I guess I see myself being not in the middle, but receiving both, and in some ways with respect.
And now, if I ask you, you are as an outsider, and then what do you think? This is you just take a guess, or just your perception about the Indigenous but contemporary artists, like an artist or musician. What do you think about the contemporary of Aborigine or contemporary current or Papua contemporary?
Yes, I think
they grow or just receive that in the museum, and then what they.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. We now have in Australia, we have Indigenous Aboriginal people making their music, but that it's music of today.
Yeah.
And sometimes it, like most music, it will connect. I think it's very interesting that Indigenous music in Australia, real Indigenous music, is very connected with the folk music of the United States, and people would say country and western, which is a kind of folk music. I know that contemporary music, I've heard contemporary music like your music and music of Ananda Sukalan, and Japanese contemporary music. The person I studied with, Taro Takemitsu, he's a contemporary musician. He's a world musician who uses kind of European style, but with sometimes Japanese instruments, but always a Japanese aesthetic, a Japanese experience. And I think that's what contemporary means to me. It's using what you have permission to use. I have permission to use Western European music. American music, I feel I have permission because it comes from a cultural... it's only the indigenous music that connects with the culture that have been damaged by colonial activity that I feel I have to have permission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sutanto was the very first time we went up to the studio after the introduction from Pak Johan at ISI. Sutanto had taught us some dances and filmed us all dancing. Much to the hilarity of all the subjects of all the locals who were there, and I think that's sort of what you were talking about before about putting us on some sort of equal exchange is a big part of what I think Sutanto is. That's what I've been learning from you. Yeah, is the idea
you obviously
of
talked to Mark Pollard.